Yo guys, anboniwow here, and welcome to my Shadow Priest PvP guide for patch 6.2.3. Now we've got a lot of things to talk about in this guide, so if you're interested in something in particular then you can click the annotations here and just go there, otherwise enjoy. And we're gonna start off with talents, and obviously depending on what type of PvP you do, be it arena, world PvP, duels, battlegrounds, and also what team you're fighting in arena, but also the comp you're playing is going to affect the talents, so you are going to have to swap these around, but not too much, not like other classes. So I'll go over the talents that I personally like to use in most situations, but whenever there's an option and an alternative, I'll mention that as well. So starting off, we've got Spectral Guise on the first tier. Spectral Guise is just infinitely better than both Desperate Prayer and Angelic Bulwark. There's no comparison. First of all, you can use Spectral Guise both as a defensive ability and as an offensive one. You can use it to swap positions, maybe put yourself in a better position. Maybe you can use it to go for a fear. You can also use it defensively to drop target. And it has a lot of utility. You can use it so you can get a Masty spell off maybe. It's just overall a lot better than both of them. Plus, you cannot get locked out of Spectral Guise, so even if you get locked in Shadow, even if you get locked in Holy School, you can still Spectral Guise whenever you feel like it. I don't even know what school Spectral Guise is, it's probably something like Nature, I don't know. On the next tier we've got Angelic Feather, and even though I don't really like Angelic Feather as a talent overall, I think it's kind of awkward, I have to give it credit for being the best talent in this tier. Body and Soul is just a weaker version of Angelic Feather, and Phantasm is kind of awkward because you're not going anywhere really, even if you move at 100% speed, and plus I like to save my fate for the damage mitigation part with the glyph, but we'll get to that in a second. So I always go for Angelic Feather here. Now on our third tier we have a little bit of a choice. Surge of Darkness is, I feel like, the best by far, but I did play with Insanity quite a bit and I like it. It's kind of more fun. Surge of Darkness does more damage, it's more bursty, plus it's instant. The problem with it is it's a bit random when you get the procs, and sometimes you get procs and you hold on to them, and when you want to do your burst then they go away and you get pissed off. But Surge of Darkness does do more damage overall, and Insanity you have to stay there and actually channel the Insanity, and people won't let you do that because in most scenarios they do go for you. But Insanity is not a bad option, and you can go for it if you know that you're not gonna be focused. Next we got Psychic Scream, aka Fear, as the best choice for this tier. Dominate Mind is really bad in PvP right now, because you basically crowd control yourself to crowd control the enemy, which is really awkward. And Void Tendrils does see a little bit of play, especially in duels, especially against warriors or DKs. But other than that, you can go for it in arena if you play with a Warlock for instance. But I don't really do that even then, because so many classes have a lot of snare breakers in this game. Almost every other class has a freedom of some sort. Plus roots can be killed really easily by melees, like in 2 hits. So I usually, like 99.9% of the cases, go for Psychic Scream. I do go for Void Tendrils in duels against warriors and sometimes against DKs as well. If you do ever find yourself playing with Void Tendrils, keep in mind that you can also shield them so that they don't die as fast. Next we've got Twist of Fate and Power Infusion, both being pretty good. I don't personally like Power Infusion because I'm not a huge fan of long cooldowns, and I feel like after you've used Power Infusion you don't have anything on that tier for a while. Plus it can get dispelled, and it does get dispelled a lot in arena. It is really good in situations when you want to go for a lot of burst, but I feel like Twist of Fate is more consistent and the buff is always there when you need it the most, and it's almost always there in battlegrounds, so Twist of Fate is the best for me. Next up we've got our AoE talent tier, and all of these are pretty bad. They all break CC, so you gotta be really careful when you use them. Divine Star is the worst here because it does almost no damage and it's really awkward to aim. Halo does the most damage, but again it's really awkward because the target needs to be at max range, and usually as a Shadow Priest you've got everyone on top of you. Plus Halo has a really long cooldown, so therefore Cascade is the best here. But again, be careful because this will break CCs. It's pretty stupid, but it is what it is. And finally we've got Clarity of Power as our only option in this tier. Since the PvP scene is so melee intensive right now and Turbo Cleave is dominating, the last thing you'd want to have is an 8-second cooldown cast and Mind Blast. Luckily we have Clarity of Power, which actually makes Shadow Priests playable and actually pretty good. As for the Shadow Priest glyphs I like to use, I always keep Glyph of Psychic Horror on. I feel like having it on a 35-second cooldown, having it line up with Hodge Fear and also Deep Freeze makes Shatter that much stronger. It's also really good in duels and world PvP because it's honestly our only real CC, except for Fear, which, like, let's be honest, most classes can break Fear right now. And since you actually use Psychic Horror as part of your burst rotation in a way, you can actually do that 10 seconds faster, which is pretty huge. So I always keep Glyph of Psychic Horror on. And another glyph that I almost never spec out of is Glyph of Fade. It makes it so that we take 10% less damage while Fade is active. Fade is also off the global cooldown, so it's actually a pretty good glyph, and I always keep this in arena. There are occasions when I spec out of it, but it's really rare and it's usually just in duels. Now I like to change my third glyph a lot depending on what kind of PvP I'm doing and what kind of arena comps I'm facing. The ones worth mentioning would be Glyph of Reflective Shield, which I almost always use in world PvP and duels. It is extremely strong. Glyph of Mass Dispel is probably my most used glyph. It lets us get rid of Bubble, Cyclone and also Ice Block, so I take this in arena a lot. Glyph of Mind Blast is another good choice as well, since our Mind Blast is on a such short cooldown and it's instant. It doesn't crit that often, but it's really nice when it does. So I actually think that the Mind Blast glyph is an underrated glyph, and it's especially good when you duel classes like Rogues or DKs or even Warriors. Another really strong glyph is Glyph of Silence, and I don't really go for this one because I'm not used to it, but I should spec into it more, especially against Shatter comps and God comps. And if you play with Glyph of Silence, you will generally save Silence as an interrupt for CC. So for instance, if the enemy mage deeps your healer, you can silence them so they can't follow that up with a Polymorph or a Frostjaw or whatever. You can also use it offensively, so you can get an easier triple CC. For instance, again against God comp, you can silence the mage and you can Psychic Horror the priest, therefore your mage can get the deep ship on their healer and stuff like that. So Glyph of Silence is definitely worth it, but it does mean you have to change your gameplay a little bit. Another really strong glyph is Glyph of Weakened Soul. Ever since the Weakened Soul nerf or buff, I don't even know what to call it, with this glyph you can basically shield yourself every 6 seconds instead of every 8 seconds. And the problem with that is if you shield yourself on cooldown every 6 seconds, you are going to run out of mana, and that's not exactly what you want. But against some comps that will train you all day long, you might want to spec it, it's pretty good. Glyph of Scourge Imprisonment is another really good glyph I like to take against unholy DKs. It makes it so that you can shackle their gargoyle and even themselves if they decide to Lichborn really fast. It's almost instant, it's really great. I almost always play with this against unholy DKs, unless we're gonna kill them. Now let's talk about stats priority. Obviously the best stat for every caster in the game is intellect. However, I believe every single piece of gear right now has a set amount of intellect, so you can't really try to gather as much intellect as you can. So yeah, intellect is the best, but you can't really pick intellect. So the second best would be mastery in my opinion. I used to say versatility was better, but thanks to how awesome Shadow Priests scale with gear, I do think that mastery is above versatility right now. Mastery does increase our Mind Blast damage as well as our Mind Spike damage and our Mind Flay damage, but that is quite irrelevant. And since Mind Blast and Mind Spike are pretty much our entire burst, you obviously want to maximize that, so Mastery is, I believe, the best right now. Followed up by Versatility. Versatility increases our damage dealt, also our shields, our heals, but also reduces the damage we take. But even if you decide to go for Versatility before Mastery, the difference is extremely small, so don't even worry about that. After that we have Haste. Haste allows us to have faster casts, also lowers the global cooldown, and also lowers the cooldown of Mind Blast, and you get a pretty solid amount of haste by going for Mastery. After Mastery, Versatility and Haste, it doesn't really matter what you go for, but I feel like Critical Strike would be the next one, and then Multi-Strike, and that's it. Really, there's Leech, but nothing has Leech on it. So if you want to have the most badass geared Shadow Priest on the realm for PvP, you want to go for the Set Helm. You will take the Mastery Multi-Strike Necklace and enchant Mastery on it. You will take the Offset Versatility and Mastery Shoulders, the Haste Mastery Cloak, the Set Chest, the Crit and Mastery Wrists, the Set Gloves, Versatility and Mastery Belt, Set Legs, Haste and Mastery Boots, As for rings, if you really want to gear your Shadow Priest to its maximum potential, you will want to have the legendary ring, which I don't. And the second ring you want to have is the Whispering Talented Ring of the Harmonious. It's pretty expensive, it's a thing that jewel crafters make, and you gotta make sure it's a stage 6 ring, so that is pretty expensive. But having those rings is definitely better than having the PvP rings, because the PvP rings have haste, multi-strike and haste plus crit. And I mean haste is okay, but crit and multi-strike are really bad. And both the other rings have versatility and mastery, which are our main stats. So if you can get your hands on those rings, then you should definitely do that. And finally, for trinkets, if you're anything other than a human, you definitely want to go for the PvP medallion trinket, the one with versatility. And for the other trinket, I personally like the Badge of Dominance, which is the trinket that you actually activate. Some people like the one that activates by itself, but I think this one's better because it gives us more control, plus it's a really short cooldown, it's just 1 minute. But if you're a human, you can obviously take both of them. But even better, if I were human, I would play with the Badge of Dominance, which is this one that you activate, and I would try to farm the Accolade, the trinket with passive Intellect and Mastery or Intellect and Versatility. And that would be the ideal set, and pure gladiator with that. GG, you won the game. And now that we have your Shadow Priest all set up and ready to go, let's talk about rotation and priorities in PvP. A Shadow Priest's rotation in PvP is actually really straightforward and actually pretty basic and simple. And this applies to all sorts of PvP, be it battlegrounds, arena, and duels. All you have to do is make sure you Mind Blast on cooldown. This is the most important part. Mind Blast on cooldown. Then you Vampiric Touch as many targets as you can, and you also apply Shadow Word Pain to your main target. The reason why you don't want to apply Shadow Word Pain to everyone else is because the shadowy apparitions, the things, the ghosts that you proc from Shadow Word Pain, can actually break CC. So even if, let's say, you play with a mage with Glyph of Polymorph and you Shadow Word Pain someone and then the mage polymorphs them, even though the mage will remove your dot with the Glyph of Polymorph, if you have a shadowy apparition in the air, it is going to break the polymorph when it reaches the target. And really, there's no point of putting Shadow Word Pain on anyone else but your main target. But when it comes to Vampiric Touch, it's a different story, because Vampiric Touch will never proc anything that's going to break CC. However, Vampiric Touch does proc your instant Mind Spikes, which are probably your main source of burst damage. So again, the priority is Mind Blast on cooldown, Vampiric Touch as many targets as possible, and Shadow Word Pain your main target. After that you have the Mind Spike procs, and then Cascade, unless it's gonna break CC, and then if there's nothing else to do, you're going to Mind Flay. And you're gonna be using this priority system until you reach 5 orbs. As soon as you reach 5 orbs, you can begin your burst sequence, and for this you have to make sure that the healer is CC'd if you're playing arena. And if you're playing, like, let's say a duel, you want to make sure that the enemy is CC'd. So you always want to lead up with a Horrify, aka Psychic Horror, or PH. Obviously, if you're playing arena, you want to talk to your teammates and let them know that you're ready to burst, so that they can aid you with CC and also with burst. And usually you will lead with the Psychic Horror, as I said, followed up by a Mind Blast, followed by a Devouring Plague, followed by all the instant Mind Spikes you have. If you don't have any instant Mind Spikes, then you do Mind Flay until you can do another Mind Blast, and then you can do another Devouring Plague. That's the basic burst that you have, and the best part about it is the fact that you don't rely on any cooldown for this. So you can do this every 35 seconds whenever you have your Horrify back up and your teammates have their cooldowns back, and you can burst someone again. Now after your burst sequence is done, all you have to do is go back to your original orb gathering sequence, which means you Mind Blast on cooldown, you keep your dots on people, you Mind Spike when you can, and you also do Mind Flay in between. However, all of these are just damage dealing abilities, and you have to get used to the fact that you have to dispel a lot. In arena, when the game starts, my priority is something like I Mind Blast on cooldown, I try to keep my dots up, and then before anything else comes purging. And I try to purge everything of my enemies before I go for a burst. But, you know, throughout the game I also keep an eye out for important buffs that I can purge off. And you also need to keep an eye out for your healer and his positioning. so that you can maybe grip him away from traps, maybe fear word him if you see an enemy priest rushing in for a fear, or even a warrior, and stuff like that. So what I'm trying to say is, don't focus on DPS as much. I mean, you have to focus on DPS obviously, but it needs to get to the point where you do all the DPS part, you know, all your rotation is kind of, you don't think about it too much, you know, it just happens. You just press Mind Blast over and over again, pretty much, that's all there is. Obviously, the more you play and the more you pay attention to what you're doing when you play, the better you're gonna become at whatever it is you're playing, or whatever it is you're doing for that matter. Whether that is playing a Shadow Priest, playing a Frost Mage, or learning how to play the piano. You know, practice does make perfect, but also whenever you practice, whenever you play, try to think about what you're doing and try to think of what you shouldn't do. And actually try to think, you know, try to actively think what you're doing. And that's actually gonna help a lot on the long term. And now really quick, I want to talk about add-ons as well, because Lindsay Eager requested it. I don't think you need a lot of add-ons as a Shadow Priest, except maybe 2 of them. The first one would be GLYPHS. GLYPHS is a pretty basic arena targets frame add-on thing. It tracks enemy trinkets, it also tracks DRs, those are diminishing returns. And there's a number of different ways to customize it, but I just leave it as default. The other add-on is Omnibar. You can use Omnibar to track a lot of enemy cooldowns. You can basically use it to track any enemy cooldowns you want. You can set it up. I use this add-on to track interrupts from my enemies and also some key cooldowns like Warrior Fear, so I can fear word my healer when it's about to come back up. Also, Nature Swiftness is nice to track, and Dispersion from a Shadow Priest, for instance, or Ice Block from a Mage. And just cooldowns like that, so it gives you more information about your enemies in arena, but mostly I use it for interrupts. And Lindsay also asked me to talk about macros, so I will. I don't feel like you need a lot of macros as a Shadow Priest. On top of the basic macros that I use, like targeting arena 1, 2, 3 or focus arena 1, 2, 3, I think that the best ones would be a fear word macro for your healer, also a life grip macro for your healer. Other than that, I just use the basic standard focus horrify, focus silence, and a bunch of other small macros that just make it more comfortable for me to play the game. If you're interested in my personal macros and keybinds and all that, just leave a comment below and I might actually make a video on that, on my keybinds and all of my macros. It's nothing really fancy, but if you're interested, I can make an updated video on that as well. And that's pretty much it for this guide. If you have any requests for any special types of guides, for instance, I'm thinking of making a God Comp guide, and maybe a 1v1 guide, maybe a battleground guide, stuff like that. If you have anything specific in mind, let me know in the comments below and I'll check it out. And yeah, thanks a lot for watching guys, and I'll catch you in the next video. See ya!